It's a pleasure to have you join us on another episode of Money Matters on TV360 Nigeria. I am Okpeyemi Owushini. Telecommunications operators in Nigeria are set to begin disconnecting mobile lines that are not linked to National Identification Numbers (NIN) following the expiration of the September 14th deadline set by the Nigerian Communications Commission in August. The NCC announced that from September 15th, no SIM card will remain active without a verified NIN. Subscribers who had not completed the NIN SIM linkage were urged to visit their service providers to resolve any verification issues before the deadline. According to March 2024 data, there are 219 million active mobile lines, of which 153 million lines have been linked to NINs, leaving approximately 66 million lines at risk of disconnection. Now, this follows a temporary barring of millions of lines in July 2024 due to unverified NINs, which caused significant disruption before the NCC reversed its decision and extended the deadline. However, with the grace period now over, the disconnections will now proceed according to the NCC. A total sum of 1.03 trillion naira June 2024 Federation account revenue has been shared with the Nigerian government, state and local government councils in the country. The revenue was shared at the September 2024 meeting of the Federation Accounts Allocation Committee held in Abuja and chaired by the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun. This was disclosed in a statement by the FAC spokesperson for the Accountant General of the Federation, Bawa Mokwa. He explained that the 1.03 trillion total distributable revenue comprised distributable statutory revenue of $186.36 billion, value-added tax revenue of $535.895 billion, electronic money transfer levy revenue of $15.017 billion, and exchange difference revenue of $468.245 billion naira. We'll take a short break now and be back with more stories in the corporate world. Welcome back. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited has released the estimated petrol prices for its retail station across the country following purchases from the Dangote refinery. In a statement by its Chief Corporate Communications Officer, Olufemi Shoneye, NNPC disclosed that it is buying premium motor spirit from Dangote in the US dollar for the month of September, with sales in Naira set to begin in October 2024. The estimated price in Lagos is around 950 Naira 22 kobo per litre, with other states seeing prices as high as 1,000 Naira in Borno. NNPC clarified that petrol prices are determined through negotiations as per the Petroleum Industry Act and not as set by the government. NNPC further noted that if any discounts are secured from Dangote refinery, they will be passed on to consumers. Pricing in other states include 999.22 kobo in Kano and Sokoto, 960 Naira 22 kobo in Oyo State, and 980 Naira 22 kobo in Rivers and Imo State. And the Group Managing Director of United African Company, Fola Ayesimoju, has stated that the company had to increase prices by an average of 75% to 100% to sustain profit margins. He explained this during the investor call on the company's financial performance in the first half of 2024. The Managing Director disclosed that the 75% to 100% increase varies from product categories. Now, in the past 1 year, inflation in Nigeria has risen to a 28% high, with consumer goods section the worst hit as food inflation soared to 40% as of June 2024. Now, in response to this, major consumer goods brands from beverages to food and household products have been forced to adjust prices to mitigate against eroding profit margins in their organizations. We'll take a short break now, but when Money Matters returns, we'll be discussing inflation rates declining for the second consecutive month in 2024. I'll bring you details of this after the short break.
In the last 3 years, we have built a multi-purpose center, which is the envy of all in our constituency. And I can tell you that the people who are living there are already enjoying it.
Guy, do you think what this man just said is true? See, I seriously doubt. I'm sure it's one of those their silly lies.
And wait, do you know there's a way to find out if these things he's saying is true or not? This is the Construct app. It gives people like us a sure way to track implementation of constituency projects. It gives valid and verified information on location of projects, amounts allocated, amount funded, the level of job done, and even the profiles of concerned legislators. You and I can post directly on this app.
Are you serious?
This is the GoTo app if you want to know how our Commonwealth is being expanded by the government.
Wow. Let's even see if what this man said is true. Show me.
The Construct app is developed by Other Paper Nigeria with support from USAID and is available on both Google Play Store and Apple Store.
And it's true.
Of course, I told you.
Welcome back. Nigeria's inflation rate has shown signs of easing for the second consecutive month, according to the latest report from the National Bureau of Statistics (NBS). The Consumer Price Index report released on the 16th of September highlights a decline in the headline inflation rate from 34.19% in June to 33.40% in July, and further down to 32.15% in August 2024. The NBS noted that the August 2024 headline inflation rate decreased by 1.25 percentage points from July 2024. However, on a year-on-year basis, the rate remains significantly higher, up by 6.35 percentage points when compared to August 2023, which recorded a rate of 25.80%. Now, on a month-on-month basis, the headline inflation rate in August was 2.22%, a slight decrease from July 2024's 2.28%. This indicates a slower rate of increase in the average price level when compared to the previous month. Now, let's discuss this further. Investment research analyst Oyindamola Oyenuga now joins me on the program. Thank you for joining me on the program, Oyenuga. Now, the headline inflation rate in Nigeria has decreased for 2 consecutive months. It increased to 33.40% in July 2024 and has now decreased to 32.15% in August. Now, how significant is this trend in the context of the broader economic situation?
Okay. I mean, looking at the numbers, this is what was generally anticipated by many analysts, and most people were anticipating that inflation would peak as of June 2024, and we'll start to see that moderating effect from July and so on, majorly due to high base effect from the previous year's numbers. But really looking at the reality of things and the reality of consumer pockets, it doesn't necessarily mean that prices have actually fallen in that sense of it, but it's just that we're seeing a slowdown in the pace of this increase, right? And okay, yes, on one hand, we're seeing that some prices of items have fallen majorly due to items that are related to seasonality and all that. But however, items that are still anchored on foreign exchange and all continue to rise. So generally, prices are still at significantly high levels, and what we are seeing is just that moderation.
Okay, so at the beginning of the year, inflation was like really, really high. And I would like to know now, what factors do you think are driving this recent decline we've been seeing, saying that this is the second consecutive month that inflation is declining this year?
Yeah. So we would attribute this decline in headline inflation largely to the food index, which is the primary driver of this decline, and this moderation is largely due to increased supply from the harvest season. We're currently in the green harvest period for items like maize, yam, potato. Even we're seeing increased supply of items like pepper, tomato, and the likes of it. So this increased supply has helped to moderate this price increase. Although on the other hand, the core index still remains consistently high. However, the food index is the primary driver of this decline that we're seeing in the headline inflation.
Now, despite the monthly decline that we've seen so far, the year-on-year inflation remains very high, and things are still quite expensive in the country. What would you say are the main reasons behind this sustained elevated level of inflation when compared to 2023?
Yeah, so thank you for that. Generally, looking at the country's, Nigeria's inflation dynamics, prices have been, on that high. They've been they've been that steady increase in the price over time, and even this year the story is very much the same. Looking at just a view at this year's numbers, we saw that significant uptick in inflation numbers, particularly around February and March. We saw how inflation moved from 29% and then it jumped to 31, and we saw another jump to about 33%. It just tells you of the story that's been happening, and also there's that general idea that prices remain sticky downwards. The tendency for prices to move up and then coming down. Prices don't tend to generally come down like that. So even what we're seeing now, like I've mentioned before, it's not as though prices are generally falling or anything, just that the pace of increase in these inflation numbers month on month, we're seeing that inflation is moderating. Yeah.
So, like, I get where you're coming from, but now food inflation has remained notably high at 37.35% in August, even with the old inflation rate easing. And like you said, when things go up in Nigeria, it's like really difficult to get the prices to come down now.
Yeah.
What would you say are the primary drivers behind the persistent high food inflation rate? And let's look at the fact that food inflation is like one of the main drivers of inflation that we have in the country at the moment. So what would you say are some of the main factors or the main drivers of food inflation in the country?
So particularly the country's the food sector in Nigeria still remains heavily challenged. I mean, there's still significant structural issues with the poor road networks and even storage facilities, high cost of transportation, and insecurity in those food producing regions. So these factors still remain a prominent problem for the food sector. But what we're seeing now, we're seeing that level of moderation, and it's not as though these factors have been generally addressed, just that they've been the gains from the harvest season and even the base effect from the previous year is kind of driving the story in this direction. But Nigeria's food sector is still very much challenged with a variety of structural items, like I've mentioned earlier.
Okay, so according to the NBS report, there was a slight decrease in month-on-month food inflation by 0.10%. Now, how do you interpret this slight decline in the context of the overall food inflation, saying that despite this slight decrease, like I mentioned earlier, things are still quite expensive in the country?
So month on month we saw that decline in inflation, and even year on year, the food inflation rate is still still high, but we're seeing that moderation to about 2.37% month on month, and even about 37.5%, like you mentioned before. This is largely attributed to seasonality of food items, like I mentioned before, and generally coming from the planting season at around early April, May. We're currently around the green harvest period, like I mentioned, and we're seeing increased supply of staple food items. And so this has, kind of, generally contributed to that month-on-month slowdown in pace of, food inflation that we're seeing in the country.
So is there any particular thing you think that can be done to address the issue of food inflation in the country, saying that it's like a really big problem?
This year, the new administration, a lot of things have been done. The government has, taken pragmatic steps to, try to address the challenges in country's food sector, and even, trying to drive down food prices and all. Just to mention a few, the distribution of seedlings and fertilizers to farmers, even suspension of import duties on some certain food items, which kickstarted in August, and the concerted efforts are trying to tackle insecurity. We believe that this has really been beneficial. Beneficial, to moderating the rate of increase, and even on the monetary end. I mean, the fiscal part of it, and also the monetary end, we've seen that consistent hike in policy rates to try to curtail, demand pressures. However, it's still a long shot. Like I've mentioned before, the country's food sector is still particularly challenged, and particularly Nigeria is an import-dependent nation. Many of number of the products that we consume here are largely imported. also and also are anchored on foreign exchange, and any movement in that, any sharp volatility in that will obviously affect the prices of items in the country. Also, with I think that a lot still needs to be done in terms of import substitution. I mean, we're seeing the efforts by the government to address these issues, but a lot still needs to be done in terms of import substitution, and then fundamentally addressing the structural challenges in the country's food sector.
Food inflation. Now let's talk about premium motor spirit. So earlier this month, I think about 2 weeks ago, NNPCL increased the pump price of fuel. So it affected transportation, cost of food, and so many other things. Now, seeing that inflation has declined for the second time in August, how do you think recent increases in petrol prices affect overall inflation in the country, particularly considering its role as a major cost of component for various commodities? It's like a really major thing. Transporters use it, market women, and all of that. So, like, how does prices of petrol affect commodities in Nigeria?
So, I mean, this is a given of saying that petrol has gone from, PMS prices have gone from about 568 and to the jump to 855 naira per liter, and then even now 950. So, considering the close correlation between the cost of fuel and even transport expenses, and how it generally impacts the entire index, both on the core aspect and even the food index, we expect that this would further pressure or further lead to inflationary pressure in the country and in the near term.
Okay, while we were speaking earlier, you mentioned that this current administration has put in several strategies to address the issue of inflation in the country. Now, what particular or current monetary or fiscal policies will you say have been effective in addressing the decrease in inflation we see currently?
So, like I mentioned before, in speaking to the fiscal side of it, we're seeing that the government has issued different policies and even taken some steps to try to address the current state of things in the country's food sector. The distribution of seedlings to farmers, distribution of tractors and fertilizer also to farmers to try to drive down their input costs. And also we are seeing the introduction of the 150-day duty-free window for some certain items like maize and the likes of them that have kind of aided these declines that we're seeing, and it's something that we also expect to that shapes our outlook for what we expect to see, the numbers we expect to see even going forward. And even on the monetary side of it, I mean, the monetary authorities have done what they've tried to address and maintain price stability in the country, in the constant hike in the policy rates, and generally trying to curtail demand pressures and all that. So we've seen some of these policies come into place, and it's having some form of effect on inflation numbers that we're seeing.
I will take a short break now, but when Money Matter returns, we'll be discussing Nigeria's inflation decreasing for the second consecutive month in 2024. Stay with us, we'll be right back.
Corruption not in my country.
Madam, madam, welcome. Okay, madam, no worry. When you deliver the balance, we'll give you the goods.
No problem, no problem. All right, so now well done.
Thank you. Hey, Oga, I still say she don't bring money. Maybe we'll use this one for him now.
She wants mahogany, not white wood.
Oga, our work now to join wood together, deliver whatever to customer. Put the remaining profit for pocket.
Abba, this is corruption, not in my country. Corruption not in my country.
Stop corruption now.
Welcome back to the program. We are still discussing Nigeria's inflation decreasing in August 2024. And I have investment research analyst Oyindamola Oyenuga with me on the program. Well, just before we went on the break, we were discussing policies that have been effective in tackling the decrease in inflation that we see at the moment. Now, will you say there are any specific policies that need adjustment or reinforcement?
So, I mean, just before we went on break, I was, emphasizing the fact that, yes, we've seen, the fiscal side and even the monetary side try to, address the state of things, the introduction of some policies and implementation of the same. But, like I mentioned before, I believe that it's still, a long shot. The food sector, which is, a primary driver of this inflation numbers, or the reason why primary driver of this inflation numbers, still the food sector is still, particularly challenged. We still have cases of insecurity where farmers are unable to, access their farmlands due to bandit attacks and the likes of that. We're also seeing, the impact of high transportation costs and how that, eventually feeds into the prices of, some of these items. And even on even on the FX part of it, I mean that's a story that cannot be left aside. The constant move in the foreign exchange still affects the prices of items, saying that Nigeria is still very import dependent, and many of the commodities or products that we consume here in the country are still anchored on FX. So any slight movement on that would affect or in turn increase the price of these items. So we still need to see more efforts, and more, practical steps in terms of import substitution, being able to source some of these products locally, and addressing the fundamental challenges and the bottlenecks in the country's food sector. I believe that's steps that still need to be taken, further steps that still need to be taken to address the situation of things in terms of food inflation and inflation generally.
Okay, so we've seen inflation decline rather twice this year, but this is just September, and we have about 3 months to go in this year. Now, I would like to know what your projections are for the country's inflation rate over the next 6 months, like away from this year now, the remaining 3 months in this year and the first 3 months of 2025. What are your projections for inflation in the country?
So, I mean, for the rest of the year, we're still anticipating that level of moderation in the country's inflation. On one hand, we expect that, the base effect from 2023 would kick in, and we'll continue to see that slow down the pace of increase. And also, this is the harvest season of key items. We're just starting the harvest season of some certain crop items. We expect that would also aid this moderation, and even the government initiatives that, like I mentioned before, to try to tackle challenges in the country's food sector would also aid this decline. But the sharp increase that we've seen in the price of petrol, fuel prices, I mean, moving from 568 and then 855 and then 950, that's about like a significant increase. In my opinion, a really high jump would definitely be a downside to this projection. And if we also see continued fluctuation or depreciation in the naira, this would definitely slow down, the pace of decline that we actually expect. But for the rest of the year, I mean, on a general note, we expect to see that moderation in headline inflation. But this downside still remain a worry to the numbers that we expect generally.
Okay, so now just before I let you go, you mentioned that inflation will most likely moderate, and we are looking forward to that. But then, how do you think global economic conditions or internal factors might influence all of these projections, are like the things you've mentioned so far?
So, I mean, all things being equal, we're generally expecting that moderation, and even with the factors that we're seeing. But any unexpected shocks, even from the international market or in the domestic scene, would obviously trigger any negative shocks, would definitely trigger our expectations in the opposite direction, and obviously reverse this trend. Yeah.
All right, we are hopeful that inflation continues to decline, and the decline affects the prices of things in the country. Investments research analyst Oyindamola Oyenuga, many thanks for lending your thoughts on the program. Thank you. Welcome. Well, that's it on this episode of the program. Many thanks for joining us. I am Okpeyemi Owoshini. See you next time.